Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to continue the read along session for the climax and disintegration of the Mughal Empire. So we'll start from the passage Aurangzeb, the Marathas and the Deccans, the last phase 1687 to 1707. After the downfall of Bijapur and Golconda, Aurangzeb was able to concentrate all his forces against the Marathas. Apart from raiding Burhanpur and Aurangabad, the new Maratha king Sambhaji had thrown a challenge to Aurangzeb by giving shelter to his rebel son Prince Akbar. So Sambhaji was basically the son and successor of Shivaji. Aurangzeb was mortally afraid that a sally by Prince Akbar into Mughal territories backed up by the Marathas might lead to a protracted civil war. However, Sambhaji took a peculiarly passive attitude towards Prince Akbar, spending his energies in a futile war with the Siddis on the coast and with the Portuguese. Prince Akbar chafed and fretted, for even when Aurangzeb was busy in his wars against Bijapur and Golconda, Shambhaji refused to give any large-scale help to Prince Akbar. The prince's dash into Mughal territory in 1686 was therefore easily repulsed. Discouraged, Prince Akbar escaped by sea to Iran and sought shelter with the Iranian king. Even after the fall of Bijapur and Golconda, Shambhaji remained immersed in pleasure and in dealing with his internal enemies. So the Bijapur and Golcondan kingdoms have fallen. In 1689, Sambhaji was surprised at his secret hideout at Sangameshwar by a Mughal force. He was paraded before Aurangzeb and executed as a rebel and an infidel. This was undoubtedly another major political mistake on the part of Aurangzeb. He could have set a seal on his conquest of Bijapur and Golconda by coming to terms with Marathas. By executing Shambhaji, he not only threw away his chance but provided the Marathas a cause. In the absence of a single rallying point, the Maratha Sardars were left free to plunder the Mughal territories, disappearing at the approach of the Mughal forces. Instead of destroying the Marathas, Akbar made the Maratha opposition all perverse in the Deccan. So, by executing Shambhaji, Aurangzeb actually paved the way for the Marathas to unite for a single cause and plunder the Mughal territories, and this was a major mistake in his consolidation of the Mughal Empire. Raja Ram, the younger brother of Sambhaji, was crowned as the king but had to escape when the Mughals attacked his capital. Raja Ram sought shelter at Jinji on the east coast and continued the fight against the Mughals from there. Thus, Maratha resistance spread from the west to the east coast. However, for the moment, Aurangzeb was at the height of his power, having triumphed over all his enemies. Some of the nobles were of the opinion that Aurangzeb should return to North India, leaving to others the task of mopping up operations against the Marathas. There was also an opinion which it appears had the support of the higher apparent Shah Alam that the task of ruling over Karnataka should be left to the vassal rulers of Bijapur and Golconda. Aurangzeb rejected all these suggestions and imprisoned Shah Alam for daring to negotiate with the Deccani rulers. Convinced that the Maratha power had been crushed, Aurangzeb after 1690 concentrated on annexing to the empire the rich and extensive Karnataka tract. However, Aurangzeb bit off more than he could chew. He unduly extended his lines of communications, which became vulnerable to Maratha attacks, and neglected the task of providing a sound administration to the settled areas of Bijapur and Golconda. During the period between 1690 and 1703, Aurangzeb stubbornly refused to negotiate with the Marathas. Rajaram was besieged at Jinji, but the siege proved to be long drawn out. Jinji fell in 1698, but the chief prize Rajaram escaped. Maratha resistance grew and the Mughals suffered a number of serious reverses. The Marathas recaptured many of their forts and Rajaram was able to come back to Satara. Undaunted, Aurangzeb set out to win back all the Maratha forts. For 5.5 years, from 1700 to 1705, Aurangzeb dragged his weary and ailing body from the siege of one fort to another. Floods, disease, and the Maratha roving bands took fearful toll of the Mughal army. Weariness and disaffection steadily grew among the nobles and the army. Demoralization set in and many Jagirdars made secret pacts with the Marathas and agreed to pay chauth if the Marathas did not disturb their Jagirs. In 1703, Aurangzeb opened negotiations with the Marathas. Eventually, he had to open negotiations because his army was facing discontentment, disappointments, and demoralization. And there were some claims that the nobles were trying to have secret pacts with the Marathas and were agreeing to pay chauth to them so that they did not disturb their Jagirs. So eventually, Aurangzeb had to negotiate with the Marathas. He was prepared to release Shahu, the son of Sambhaji, who had been captured at Satara along with his mother. Shahu had been treated well. He had been given the title of Raja and the Mansab of 7,000. On coming of age, he had been married to two Maratha girls of respectable families. Aurangzeb was prepared to grant Shahu Shivaji Swaraj and the right of Sardesh Mukhi over the Deccan, thus recognizing his special position. Over 70 Maratha Sardars actually assembled to receive Shahu, but Aurangzeb cancelled the arrangements at the last minute, uncertain about the intentions of the Marathas. Shahu was the son of Shambhaji and he was also captured along with his mother during the siege of Aurangzeb at Satara, where he actually executed Sambhaji. So, when there was news of Shahu being released, there were about 70 Maratha Sardars who came to receive him, but Aurangzeb at the last moment was uncertain of the intentions of the Marathas and just cancelled all of it. By 1706, Aurangzeb was convinced of the futility of his efforts to capture all the Maratha forts. He slowly retreated to Aurangabad while an exulting Maratha army hovered around and attacked the stragglers. Thus, when Aurangzeb breathed his last at Aurangabad in 1707, he left behind an empire which was sorely distracted and in which all the various internal problems of the empire were coming to a head. Decline of the Mughal Empire, responsibility of Aurangzeb. The Mughal Empire declined rapidly after the death of Aurangzeb. The Mughal court became the scene for faction fighting among the nobles, and soon ambitious provincial governors began to behave in an independent manner. The Maratha depredations extended from the Deccan to the heartland of the empire, the Gangetic Plains. The weakness of the empire was proclaimed to the world when Nadir Shah imprisoned the Mughal emperor and looted Delhi in 1739. To what extent was the downfall of the Mughal Empire due to developments after the death of Aurangzeb, and to what extent was it due to the mistaken policies adopted by Aurangzeb? There has been a good deal of discussion on this point among the historians. There's a note over here which says that it has been said that Aurangzeb offered the Raj to Shahu on the conditions of his turning into a Muslim. So the radical thoughts of Aurangzeb have been the most serious culprit in all of the dreadful activities which he had done during his regime. Contemporary records do not support this. If Aurangzeb had wanted to convert Shahu to Islam, he could have done so while he was his captive during the preceding years. But let's see whatever has happened. We don't have any substantial proofs of it, right? These are just free talks. While not absolving Aurangzeb from all responsibility, the recent trend has become to view his reign in the context of economic, social, administrative, and intellectual situation prevailing in the country, as also the developing international trends. before and during his regime. The working of economic and social forces in medieval India has yet to be fully understood. We have seen in an earlier chapter that trade and commerce were expanding in India during the 17th century and that handicraft production was keeping pace with the growing demand. Thus, in turn, could this in turn could only have been made possible if the production of raw materials such as cotton, indigo, etc., had expanded simultaneously. The area under Zapti, that is where the system of measurement was followed, expanded according to the official Mughal statistics. There is some evidence, in fact, that the total area under cultivation expanded. This was due in part to the working of the economic forces and in part to the administrative policies pursued by the Mughals. We have also had previous instances in previous chapters that there was uh, an encouragement in order to augment the land under cultivation. So the ruler was actually trying to encourage people so that they could have more land under cultivation and the agriculture and production could be boosted. Every noble, even a religious grantee, was expected to take personal interest in the expansion and improvement of cultivation, and careful records of such growth were maintained. Historians are surprised at the detailed records that were maintained regarding the number of plows, bullocks, and wells in each village, and the increase in their numbers as well as the number of cultivators. Despite this, there is reason to believe that trade and manufacture as well as agriculture production were stagnating, that is, they were not expanding as rapidly as the situation required. This was due to a number of factors. No new methods of cultivation were available to counter the trend of declining production as the soil became exhausted. The land revenue was heavy. From Akbar's time, it was more or less half of the produce. If we include the share to the zamindars and the other local elements, though the state demand varied from area to area, being less in the less fertile areas of Rajasthan and Sindh and more in the fertile areas as the saffron producing areas in Kashmir, it was not generally speaking so heavy as to drive the peasant away from the land. In fact, figures from eastern Rajasthan show that the new villages were continuously being founded during the second half of the 17th century and the early part of the 18th century. We do not have figures for the earlier period. The basic reasons for limiting expansion, it appears, were social and partly administrative. Since the population of the country during the period is estimated to be about 125 million, there was plenty of surplus cultivable land available. However, we hear of landless laborers in many villages. The bulk of these people, it seems, can be broadly classified as untouchables. So, the untouchables were basically the people who did not possess any land and worked as landless laborers. The cultivating communities and the zamindars, who often belonged to the upper caste, had little desire or incentive to make it possible for the untouchables to settle new villages and thus acquire property rights in the land. They had, in fact, a vested interest in keeping them in the village as a reserve labor force and for performing various menial jobs for them, such as skinning the dead animals, making leather, ropes, etc. The rural, landless, and poor, those who had very small land holdings, had neither the necessary capital nor the organization needed for settling new villages or breaking uncultivated lands on their own. The state did sometimes take the initiative in settling new lands, but the untouchables were not able to take full advantage of this because the state had to involve the local zamindars and the village headmen, mukaddams, in the enterprise, and they belonged to the other caste and had their own vested interest, as we have noted. While production increased slowly, the demands and expectations of the ruling classes expanded rapidly. Thus, the number of mansabs rose from 2069 at the time of Jahangir's accession in 1605 to 8,000 in 1637 during Shah Jahan's reign and to 11,456 during the latter half of the Aurangzeb's reign. While the number of nobles rose 5 times, the revenue sources of the empire did not increase in the same proportion. Moreover, Shah Jahan inaugurated uh, what may be called an age of magnificence. The opulence of the nobles, who already enjoyed the highest salaries in the world, increased further during the period. Though many nobles took part in the trade and commerce, directly or through merchants acting on their behalf, income from trade and commerce could only supplement their income, which continued to be mainly from land. Hence, they tried to increase their income from land, squeezing the peasants and zamindars. There's a note over here. Under Akbar, the standard rate was one third of the average produce, but the share of zamindar and the local elements was not included in it. From the middle of the 17th century, the state share generally rose to half, but it included the share of zamindar and local elements, the village headmen, etc. So during Akbar's rule, the standard rate was one third of the average produce, but it did not include the share of the intermediaries like the zamindars, village headmen, etc. But from the middle of the 17th century, the state share rose to half of it, half of the average produce, and it included the intermediary shares as well. We know very little about the number of zamindars and their living standards. Mughal policy towards zamindar was contradictory. While on one hand the zamindars were considered the main threat to the internal stability of the empire, on the other hand efforts were made to draw them into the task of local administration, and many of them, Rajputs, Marathas, etc., were given mansabs and political offices in an effort to broaden the political base of the empire. The zamindars, who as a class had become more powerful and influential in the process, were in no mood to submit to the illegal exactions of the nobles. Nor was it easy to increase the exactions on the peasantry still further, especially when there was plenty of surplus cultivable land and the zamindar and the village headmen vied with each other to try to attract new cultivators to their lands. The movement of these migrant peasants called Pahis or Uparis from village to village in search of better conditions is a little noticed feature of the medieval rural life. So the movement of migrant peasants who are called as Pahis or Uparis, who migrate from village to village in search of better conditions. Thus attempts to realize more from the Jagirs, often by means not sanctioned by the state, brought to the surface all the internal contradictions of the Mughal rural society. It led to peasant discontentment in some areas, uprisings led by zamindars in some others, and attempts to carve out independent local kingdoms in still others. At the administrative level, it led to growing dissatisfaction and factionalism in the nobility, and to the growth of what has been called the crisis of the Jagirdari system. The attempts of the nobles to corner the most profitable Jagirs resulted in the Mughal administrative system becoming even more corrupt. Aurangzeb added to the crisis by steadily increasing the khalisha or the tax reserved for the royal expenses. This was to meet the growing administrative expenses as also the cost of wars, which were a continuous feature of his reign. The nobility was the most important institution which developed under the Mughal. We have seen how the Mughals were able to attract to their services some of the most competent people, irrespective of race or creed, from various sections within the country and from also outside. The nobility was able to function successfully in the highly personalized system of administration and, on the whole, maintained a fair state of security and peace in the country. But this role the nobility played only as a service to the emperor served their own interest. It is wrong to argue, as some historians have done, that the nobility decayed because the vivifying stream of immigrants from Central Asia stopped after the death of Aurangzeb. By the time Aurangzeb ascended the throne, the bulk of the Mughal nobility consisted of those who had been born in India. The belief that there was something wrong in the Indian climate was led to the decline of character. The belief that there was something wrong in the Indian climate, which led to the decline of character, was really a racialist argument. So this is typically a racialist argument that Indian climate had something which led to a decline of character. Okay. The opposite is said by the Indians that if you cross seas, if you cross the sea, you lose your character. Which was used by the people who served in the British Army at that time during the middle of the 18th century. So, racialist argument put forward by the British historians to justify India's dominion, India's domination by people coming from colder climates and can no longer be accepted by us. So I'll just read it again. The belief that there was something wrong in the Indian climate which led to the decline of the character was really a racialist argument put forward by the British historians to justify India's domination by people coming from colder climates and can no longer be accepted by us. It has also been argued that the Mughal nobility acted in an anti-national manner because it was drawn from diverse communities and ethnic and racial groups and hence lacked a national character. A sense of nationalism, as we understand the term today, did not exist in medieval times. But the concept of loyalty to the salt and effective was effective enough to ensure loyalty to the Mughal dynasty and a broad sense of patriotism. As we've seen, the nobles who came from abroad had few links left with the country of their origin and shared the Indo-Mughal cultural values and outlook. The Mughals had devised a careful system of checks and balances at various levels in their administrative machinery and tried to balance various ethnic and religious groups in such a way that the ambitions of individual nobles or groups of them could be kept under control. Nobles began to assume independent heirs only when the administrative machinery was allowed to decay by the successors of Aurangzeb, and on account of the steady accentuation of the crisis of the Jagirdari system. Thus, disintegration was speeded up not because of but as a result of the breakdown of the Mughal administrative system. Of course, it can be said that the Mughal administrative system was highly centralized and needed a competent monarch to run it. In the absence of such monarchs, wazirs tried to fill the bill, but they failed. Thus, individual failure and the breakdown of system reacted on each other. On the political field, Aurangzeb committed a number of serious mistakes. We have already referred to his inability to understand the true nature of the Maratha movement and his disregard of Jai Singh's advice to befriend Shivaji. The execution of Shambhaji was another mistake, for it deprived Aurangzeb of a recognized Maratha head to negotiate with. Apparently, Aurangzeb had no desire to negotiate with the Marathas. He was convinced that after the extinction of Bijapur and Golconda, he had the Marathas at his mercy and that the Marathas had no option but to accept his terms, a truncated Swaraj and promise of loyalty and service to the Mughal emperor. When Aurangzeb realized his mistake and opened negotiations with the Marathas, a demand for Chauth and Sardeshmukhi proved a serious obstacle. Even his even this had been by and large surmounted. By 1703, agreement had been more or less arrived at, but Aurangzeb could not bring himself to trust Shahu and Maratha Sardars as we have seen. Aurangzeb failed to solve the Maratha problem and thus left an open sore. He did give mansabs to many Maratha Sardars. In fact, Maratha Sardars had more mansabs at the highest levels than the Rajputs ever had. Yet, the Maratha Sardars were not trusted. Unlike the Rajputs, they were never given offices of trust and responsibility. Thus the Marathas could not be integrated into the Mughal political system. Here again, a political settlement with Shivaji or Shambhaji or Shahu might have made a big difference. Aurangzeb had been criticized for having failed to unite with the Deccan states against the Marathas or for having conquered them, thereby making the empire so large that it collapsed under its own weight. A unity of hearts between Aurangzeb and the Deccan states was a psychological impossibility once the Treaty of 1676 was abandoned, the Treaty of Purandar, a development which took place during the reign of Shah Jahan himself. After his accession, Aurangzeb desisted from pursuing a vigorous forward policy in the Deccan. In fact, he postponed as long as possible his decision to conquer and annex the Deccan states. Aurangzeb's hand was virtually forced by the growing Maratha power and the support extended to Shivaji by Madanna and Kanna from Golconda, and the fear that Bijapur might fall under the domination of Shivaji and the Maratha dominated Golconda. Later, by giving shelter to the rebel Prince Akbar, Shambhaji virtually threw a challenge to Aurangzeb, who quickly realized that the Marathas could not be dealt with without first subduing Bijapur and possibly Golconda. The attempt to extend Mughal administration over Golconda, Bijapur, and Karnataka stretched the Mughal administration to the breaking point. It also laid Mughal lines of communication open to Maratha attacks, so much so that the Mughal nobles in the areas found it impossible to collect their dues from the Jagirs assigned to them and sometimes made private pacts with the Marathas. This in turn raised the power and prestige of the Marathas, led to demoralization of the nobility and a setback to the imperial prestige. So this can also be said to be the achievements of the Marathas because it led to the demoralization of the Mughal nobility and a setback to the imperial prestige. Perhaps Aurangzeb might have been better advised to accept the suggestion apparently put forward by his eldest son Shah Alam, who he executed for a settlement with Bijapur and Golconda, annex only a part of their territories and let them rule over Karnataka, which was far away and difficult to manage. So there was a paragraph on Shah Alam. Yeah, he imprisoned Shah Alam. He was not executed. He imprisoned him for daring to negotiate with the Deccani rulers. So Aurangzeb basically declined all the good advices which were offered to him, be it from Raja Jai Singh, be it from his son Shah Alam. He just declined all of the good opportunities and threw the Mughal Empire in bits because of his political mistakes. So his eldest son advised for a settlement with Bijapur and Golconda and annex only a part of their territories and let them rule over Karnataka, which was far away and difficult to manage for the Mughal administration because the Mughal forces were basically concentrated in the northern India, and obviously the communication lines were open to destruction by the Maratha forces. The impact of Deccani and the other wars on the Mughal Empire and of the prolonged absence of Aurangzeb from northern India should not be overestimated. Despite the mistakes of policy and some of the personal shortcomings of Aurangzeb, such as his excessive suspiciousness and his narrow and cold temperament, so Aurangzeb was a paranoid and the Mughal Empire was still a powerful and vigorous military and administrative machinery. The Mughal army might fail against the elusive and highly mobile bands of Marathas in the mountainous region of Deccan. Maratha forts, Maratha forts might be difficult to capture and still more difficult to retain. But in the plains of northern India and the vast plateau extending up to the Karnataka, Mughal artillery was still master of the field. 30 or 40 years after Aurangzeb's death, when the Mughal artillery had declined considerably in strength and efficiency, the Marathas could still not face it in the field of battle. Continuous anarchy, wars, and the depredations of the Marathas may have depleted the population of the Deccan and brought its trade, industry, and agriculture to a virtual standstill. But in northern India, which was the heart of the empire and was of decisive economic and political importance in the country, the Mughal administration still retained much of its vigor. In fact, the administration at the district level proved amazingly tenacious, and a good deal of it survived and found its way indirectly into the British administration. Politically, despite the military reverses and the mistakes of Aurangzeb, Mughal dynasty still retained a powerful hold on the mind and imagination of the people. As far as the Rajputs are concerned, we have seen that the breach with Marwar was not due to an attempt on Aurangzeb's part to undermine the Hindus by depriving them of the recognition by depriving them of a recognized head, but to a miscalculation on his part. He wanted to divide the Marwar state between the two principal claimants and in the process alienated both, as also the ruler of Mewar who considered Mughal interference in such matters to be a dangerous precedent. The breach with Mewar and the long drawn out war which followed damaged the moral standing of the Mughal state. However, the fighting was not of much consequence militarily after 1681. It may be doubted whether the presence of Rathore Rajputs in large number of the Deccans between 1681 and 1706 would have made much difference in the outcome of the conflict with the Marathas. In any case, the demands of Rajputs related to grant of high mansabs as before and restoration of their homelands. These demands these demands have been accepted within half a dozen years of Aurangzeb's death. The Rajputs ceased to be a problem to the Mughals. They played no role in the subsequent disintegration of the empire but could not arrest the process of decline. Aurangzeb's religious policy could Aurangzeb's religious policy should be seen in the social, economic, and political context. Aurangzeb was orthodox in his outlook and tried to remain within the framework of the Islamic law, but this law was developed outside India in vastly dissimilar situations and could hardly be applied rigidly to India. His failure to respect the susceptibles of his non-Muslim subjects on many occasions, his adherence to the time-worn policy towards temples and reimposition of jizya as laid down by the Islamic law did not help him to rally the Muslims to his side or generate a greater sense of loyalty towards a state based on Islamic law. On the other hand, it alienated the Hindus and strengthened the hands of those sections which were opposed to the Mughal Empire by political or other reasons. Religion was not a point of religion was not a point at issue. Jizya was scrapped within half a dozen years of Aurangzeb's death, and restrictions on building new temples eased. But these again had no effect on the rapidly accelerating decline and disintegration of the empire. In the ultimate resort, a decline and downfall of the empire was due to economic, social, political, and institutional factors. Akbar's measures helped to keep the forces of disintegration in check for some time, but it was impossible for him to effect fundamental changes in the structure of society. By the time Aurangzeb came to the throne, the socio-economic forces of disintegration were already strong. Aurangzeb lacked the foresight and statesmanship necessary to effect fundamental changes in the structure or to pursue policies which could, for the time being, reconcile the various competing elements. The Aurangzeb was both a victim of the circumstances and helped to create the circumstances of which he became a victim. So, with this, we've come to an end of the massive chapter on climax and disintegration. So, I hope you would have been with me for this whole time, and I'll see you guys in another video.